they will take this one. Right, that's where we leave it for the first part of our Week 3 preview, brought to you by RuPoint, demonstrating the value of global PR and comms. Find out more at rupoint.com. Now we're into segment 2 of our Week 7 preview, and Lions at Ravens, one of the games to watch this weekend, and one of the games, of course, that's on in Buskers on the Ball in Temple Bar in Dublin. Well worth checking out if you're in the vicinity. You can also check out Kansas City in the other game, and the Red Zone on screens for anybody who's wanting to follow the witching hour and wanting to follow the action. Red Zone play by Red Zone play. Brian, Ravens, we managed to see them in person in London last weekend. You know, a lot to admire in some senses. A kind of a funny game, but ultimately a fairly decisive win for them against the Titans in the end. Lamar's looking really good, you know, really carrying this team at the moment. Zay Flowers looks like an exciting wide receiver, but the running game has not been where they would want it to be, apart from Lamar himself, who's picking up over 5 yards a clip. The Lions don't allow even the great running teams to run. That's going to be something that they'll really want to watch this weekend. In Baltimore, is there any chance of them slowing down that Lions team? You know, in some ways you'd argue that they maybe have the weapons to do it, but whatever way you look at it, I think this is going to be a pretty titanic battle. It's
probably the most difficult game of the weekend, generally, to pick from. You look at both arguments, you give two, various different reasons as to why both teams will win. You're right. Well, look, we saw Lamar. I felt we saw a different Lamar last weekend. Over the course of the more patient Lamar. Like, how many times did you call her out, Connor, to me during the game that they were the type of players where he got out in the perimeter, he'd normally run. Over the course he just let off and go. But he seems to have, brought a new patience to his game, waiting for the wide receivers to get open. And I suppose it's evident by what we saw with, say, Flowers last weekend and other players, that he does have more players around him at his disposal that he can get the ball to. And like other players that have come in that are kind of floating under the radar, like Aguilar, the big play in the first half. They've got the weapons, but I still didn't think they put it together for four quarters. Like, I think we were sitting down at half time last week, but this game is over. And then they struggled early on in the second half. They had the interception with Murphy Bunting and allowed the Titans to come back into it. And you'd worry about that, where they don't put 4 quarters together, and the Lions right now are feasting on teams. But it really is a tricky one. To me, it's more about whose defense comes out on top, because just on it, the Lions defense is playing so well. Can they slow Lamar down, as opposed to whether the Ravens defense can slow the Lions down? I'm going to go with the Ravens. I think just the Lions are on a great. It's a great story. They're clearly going to be the team that wins this division. And we spoke last week about, was that game in Tampa the kind of marquee game they needed to kind of prove that they're legit? This is another one, and these games are going to come thick and fast. And I think it's a close. I can see this come down to a field goal. I'll go with Justin Tucker to find it to be the game-winning field goal. Tight game. Ravens just about come out on top.
Yeah, interesting, and maybe there's an element of recency bias because we have just seen them in the flesh. But I thought I was going to be the outlier in picking the Ravens here. I thought we'd end up going Lions across the board, and I'd be justifying going in the other direction. I actually think the Ravens might just squeak this out. They have a very good record against the Lions. I know this is a different Lions team, but in recent matchups, Ravens have definitely held the edge. They have a fairly decisive win-loss record against them. I think the Lions have been running really smoothly and it's been going really well. The pattern of this season, though, is that just when you start thinking that a team is making that run, they kind of come off the rails. This is a really tricky game for them. I do think the Ravens will just about edge it, but I'm fascinated to see what way it unfolds. Colm, how's it going for you?
This, to me, I suppose this is an interesting one because think about Sideshow Bob and the Rakes, okay? And how many years was that the Lions, right? Where they constantly found new ways to walk into a rake and to end up with, being their own worst enemy. But I think the tables have turned. That is the Ravens this year. Brian has alluded to it there. They've gotten away with it occasionally. It's cost them at other times. The Ravens could be, if it hadn't been for their own errors, they could be unbeaten. And in some ways they deserve to. But this Lions team, I think they have a really special group, and I think they have a special bond with their coaching staff. And I think Dan Campbell has done a great job. He is not the meathead, and he likes to play that up in the media. But the players, the way in which they respond to him, they go out and they perform for him. And I think that you saw last year, Aaron Rodgers, people kind of knew, it was going to be the last game in Green Bay. There was huge amounts of pressure. Pat McAfee had built it up all week. He was going to love it, when the Packers were going to beat the Lions. And the Lions went in, they dealt with the pressure. I think they can deal with the pressure. And I'm going to be the odd one out. I'm going to say the Lions can go into Baltimore and they can win.
All right, we got Commanders and Giants up next. A classic divisional clash. Giants have definitely had the edge in the fixture. I'll go first on this one and say this is a toss-up for me. It's a game the Giants really absolutely have to win. Otherwise, the season kind of is pretty much lost. Things haven't looked right in New York, Brian, like not only on the field, but off the field. Like there's just a pall hanging over Brian Daboll when you look at him. The Commanders, on the other hand, while they've been volatile, there hasn't been any lack of effort. They very much look like they're playing for Ron Rivera and Eric Bieniemy and that staff. When Sam Howell looks good, he looks quite good indeed and can get things going. That front four they have defensively doesn't quite compensate for everything else they have defensively, but it at least gives them a shot. And I'm going to pick Washington to squeak this one out on the road. Brian, over to you, your beloved Giants.
I think this game comes down to which offensive line can hold up the most, because the Commanders have the worst offensive line in the league, despite the Giants' struggles. They're actually second last in terms of sacks. So 34 sacks for the Commanders, 33 for the Giants. So we're going to go into a game which looks again like it's going to be Tyrod Taylor. And I've looked at the numbers of the Commanders' defense. They gave up 400 yards last weekend, offensively under 200. Like, they're no great shakes on defense either. Yeah, they've got a strong front seven, but haven't really put it together. But yet they found ways to get over the line, and that's, for me, because I said that on the show last week, strikes me in a way as like the Giants last year. They're playing for this coaching staff. I would be a bit more enthusiastic as a Giants fan after last weekend's performance. I think it wasn't for certain idiotic plays at the end of the first half and poor refereeing at the end, where for some reason you're not allowed to throw two flags in a row on two plays. I think the Giants would have got out of Buffalo with a win. And if they had got over the line, it'd be a very different narrative this week. I'm gonna side with you, Connor, and this I'm gonna go with the Commanders. I think they got the players offensively to trouble this Giants defense. Once the Giants defense has played quite well last week, I'm still one game. I need to see it from a few more games. The turnover battle they've won over the past 2 weeks. If they win the turnover battle on Sunday, I think they will win the game. But it strikes me as a game that it'll come down nip and tuck to the fourth quarter. I think Commanders find a way to get over the line and move to 4-3.
Colin, as Brian said, to be fair, the Giants came pretty close to pulling that one out against the Bills, almost in spite of themselves, and particularly the offensive troubles that they've been having this season. Can they build on that and take down the Commanders this weekend?
I think they'd have a chance, or a better chance, if their medical staff wasn't led by Dr. Nick Riviera, because what is going on? It is absolutely ridiculous. They're literally pulling guys off the street. Like, if you go along to this game, bring some shoulder pads, because it is quite possible the Giants might invite you down from the stands to play across the offensive line. More guys going on IR this week. Things, I don't, things not right. It was interesting, I suppose, the non-handshake at the end between Dable and McDermott. That was quite interesting. I just think the Commanders, like the Giants, I think will get to Sam Howell, but I don't think they'll be able to score enough. I think the Commanders will be able to get enough points, but I do think after this game, Sam Howell will still be on course to break David Carr's sack record. So it's that is not sustainable. But in this game, they should have enough. I think is that the first one we've gone right across
looks that way. Yeah, looks that way. Can I throw in a theory on the Dable McDermott storyline? I was reflecting on when Brian Dable's last game for Buffalo was, and in fact it was that 13-second game, as we like to call it, in the playoffs. And in the last 2 minutes of that game, 2.5 minutes, the Bills scored 3 touchdowns, led by Brian Dable, offensive coordinator at the time. And Sean McDermott took over those play calling. Remember, defensively, I'll sort this out, Mr. Fraser. I'll figure this out. And of course, he loses the game. And obviously, he walked away and became a head coach thereafter. I still wonder, does that game eat away at him? Because it got pulled up on one of the interviews before the season started by Boomer Esiason, and he quickly put Boomer in his place. But it was very evident the sting of that game still sits, and I wonder, is that one of the reasons? And there you go. Not relevant to the game itself, but however. Keep an eye on that storyline. We mightn't have many more storylines for the season. We might need something.
Colm, the Cardinals travel to Seattle this weekend to face the Seahawks, who are off the back of a tough loss in Cincinnati last week in a very tight game. Cardinals have been pretty competitive all this season, and including again last week. Some of the bookies have this as a 7.5 point game, which I think is a little bit disrespectful to the Cardinals, I have to say. What do you reckon?
I think that's probably a testament to the Seahawks where they're and to Pete Carroll and what they're doing now. I think the issue for the Seahawks has been the red zone. I mean, that's ultimately what cost them last week. And I know there was a lot of chatter I was listening to the Athletic podcast earlier this week, and I think it was Nate Tice was saying that he actually felt better about the Seahawks coming out of that game, even though they lost, than the Bengals. And I thought that was very, very interesting. But my worry with the Seahawks is that DK Metcalf appears to be auditioning for a role in Itchy and Scratchy because he finds new ways to get into fights every single week. And it is at some point it becomes an issue. I think given where the Seahawks are also playing, without their top 2 tackles, I think they have been impressive. 2 frustrating losses. The Cards have been feisty. Divisional matchup, I think they will remain feisty. But at home, I expect this to be a Seahawks victory.
Yeah, I have to say, like you, Colm, and I'll pick up on that, the DK Metcalf point. It's not just that he's been a penalty machine. I think he's one of the most penalised offensive players in the league, which you expect if you're a lineman would be enough of a problem. But you shouldn't be getting hit with 15-yard penalties as a wide receiver. It's not just that; it's how unapologetic he was when confronted with it, saying, "I'm not going to change who I am." Like, why do you come out and make a dumb comment like that? Do you really want to attract any more refereeing attention, any more league attention? It's just not helpful to your team. Yeah, Pete Carroll loves a physical, aggressive guy who plays on the edge. As long as you're not playing over the edge and hurting your team with 15 yards unnecessary roughness and unsportsmanlike conduct penalties, like that's a momentum killer. That's a drive killer. And that's not what you need. Now, having said all that, I still think the Seahawks are going to win this one at the weekend. I think they're in good shape this season. They're, quietly building a decent bit of momentum in spite of that loss in Cincinnati. And I don't think Arizona I don't think it's going to be as far away as the bookies suggest. I think Cardinals probably going to cover there, but I think it's a Seattle win. Brian, what do you reckon?
I'll go against you on that, Connor. I think this is there's a guy in New York, and when he puts up his betting podcast, he refers to games where you're watching blowouts as the rocking chair game, and this is what this one is for me. I'll be rocking in my chair come the third quarter on this one with the Seahawks comfortably winning. I think this might be the last time we see Joshua Dobbs potentially, with the news that Kyler Murray has come off the IR. He's in the 21-day lead window now where he can be designated to play again, and he's back, putting up on social that he's back with the team, and I imagine they will look to get him back into the action sooner rather than later. So it'd be interesting to see. Look, if you look at the numbers over the course of the last 3 or 4 weeks in particular, like the Cardinals, with the exception maybe that maybe the Cowboys game, I think before last week they were outscored in the second half 44-7. I mean, that's what we're getting to. So that was in the fourth quarter, but gradually over the course of the last few weeks, we're seeing they play well for, of course, 2 quarters, halftime. Then the team playing against them finds ways to pull away. But in this game, I think the Seahawks will be smart and disappointed after last week's loss, and I think they'll put all their energies into putting a bit of a marker down. So I think, unfortunately, for the Cardinals, it'll be this Sunday out with the 12th man. I think this is a beatdown type of game.
All right, last game of the segment, Steelers at Rams. I'll kick this one off. Steelers have 2 wins on the board that they should just not have. I know your record is, as Bill Parcells famously said, you are what your record says you are. I think the Steelers are blessed to be sitting where they're sitting at the moment. They're winning games in spite of their offense, not because of it. They've pulled special teams plays out of the hat. They pulled big defensive plays from TJ Watt out of the hat that somehow managed to get them over the line and steal victories, in particular against the Ravens, where they were blessed, and against the Browns in a game they really probably should have lost, which they had a terrible fourth quarter, couldn't move the ball at all, and yet somehow miraculously managed to get the win. Now, Mike Tomlin off a bye, that's a dangerous proposition if you're the Rams, and not necessarily what you want to see coming into town. A fresh, hungry Steelers team with a point to prove and with a chip on their shoulder. If not now, when, you'd have to say. I still think, however, that the Rams are going well enough that I think LA takes this one. I think. Despite the absence of Kyron Williams, Kyron as they call him in LA, I think I've seen enough from the Rams that they should do what 2 other teams have notably failed to do this season, and find a way to put away the Steelers, because Steelers just can't score enough points. Brian, what do you think?
I'll go to the Steelers in this one. I think coming off the bye week, I think the stadium in particular on Sunday will be full of Steelers fans. It'll be more like a home game for the Steelers, and Matthew Stafford has to navigate against that. Would probably be the silent count for large parts of the game. And I think Williams, the running back, who's just on there, being out, is a huge loss for them. I mean, just sometimes you go into a season, that bright spot comes out of nowhere, and you become so reliant on him, and obviously they're very much reliant on the new wide receiver. And I think the Steelers just have this way of grinding down teams and just keeping in it and navigating late drives, and that's the type of game I see on Sunday. I think they'll just sneak a victory, find a way. Won't be pretty again, but defensively, I think we'll see a bit of a reaction. They had a really disappointing performance against the Texans last day. I think they'll slow the Rams down, have enough Steelers to get over the line. Won't be pretty.
Colin, it's up to you to break the tie then. Is it Pittsburgh or LA?
Well, I think last year, Sean McVay, and I think we're only really beginning to find out the exact extent of it now, came very close to what appears to have been a breakdown of as such. And like, it kind of was like Frank Grimes in Homer's Enemy, where everything had gone right, and then all of a sudden nothing was going right, and everything he tried to do, and the more he worked at it, the worse things got. And he is he certainly was a control freak. By all accounts, Jordan Rodriguez did a really excellent podcast series called The Play Callers, and she's kind of written a lot more about him this year. He's taken a new approach, and we've talked about a little bit about how revitalized he looks, but they're deliberately doing that, and he is being much more consultative with his assistants and looking around, and it's probably a little bit different to maybe Mike Tomlin and the Canada situation, because Mike Tomlin is a great coach, but Matt Canada should not be offensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He should not have come back. And if Mike Tomlin, realistically, if his ego allowed, Matt Canada would be fired, right? They would, but they won't do it. And the Rooneys are never going to force Tomlin's hand. And I think that is ultimately a disaster for a team, because we talk so much about McVay, but we forget that they have a brilliant DC. They really do. And I think he is capable of dealing with the Steelers. I don't think they'll be able to drag the Rams down into the mud. I'm going to say the Rams win.
I was crying out for somebody to say blame Canada, but that's South Park rather than The Simpsons, so we won't go there. And that wraps up our second segment of the Week 7 preview. Right, we're in segment